What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Brian and myself are joined by Adam Neth. In a minute, I'm going to have Adam introduce himself, but a little bit of a background. Adam is someone that Brian and I have just corresponded with on Instagram over like the last, I think maybe like year or so for me. I'm not sure how long for Brian. And then I actually had the opportunity to lift with Adam in his lift lab, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes here when I was in Ohio a few weeks back. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to have him on the podcast and just dig into a little bit more about what he does, how he got into what he does, and just have someone that we both respect and like on ETP to talk about lifting weights a little bit. So Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Can you just introduce the listeners a little bit to yourself and your background, what you do?
Yeah, so I am 29 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio right now. And I essentially started training when I was around 11, 12 years old. Essentially got into it for the aspect of sports performance. So I did have a brother who's 3 years older than me. He was involved in football, powerlifting, and then actually my dad was a pretty big influence too. I remember being 7, 8 years old, and he was in the backyard posing, doing Body for Life. I'm not sure if you guys remember that back in the 90s, but yeah, my dad had big influence on me and pretty much taught me how to bench, squat, deadlift. And he had started me with a program that was like pyramid styling. So it was like doing sets of 12, 10, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. So it was a whole lot of volume. So after I got into resistance training for sports performance, I got into football and track in 7th and 8th grade. Had a fantastic strength conditioning coach in high school, Jason McGarren, and he was a huge role model for me. Was doing a lot of like hang cleans, actually got into CrossFit around that time as well. And that was when CrossFit had their mascot, Pukey. I don't know if you guys remember Pukey, but I think that whole thing went away when rhabdomyolysis became a norm in that sport. And then I was very, very fortunate to come across Lane Norton in high school as well. So I had a ton of great influence in the very beginning of my lifting career. Had graduated high school 2012, went to Capital University to get my bachelor's in sports science, and came across a couple of really good friends that were into natural bodybuilding as well. And then around that time, found Matt Ogus, 3DMJ, which again had great influence on me. Ended up transferring to another college, which was actually in where I live now in Dayton, Wright State University. And that's when I became a certified personal trainer at the age of 19, and then competed the following year in 2014 at a Natural Ohio Bodybuilding Association. I stepped on stage at like 157 pounds. I mean, I was just so damn skinny. I was chasing the shredded glutes that was very popular back then in the early times of natural bodybuilding to me. And then once I graduated college, I moved down to Cincinnati, and I was a personal trainer for about five and a half years at 2 different locations. So one location was the JCC, a Jewish Community Center, actually. And my boss there was really into powerlifting. So it was really cool to get his ideologies around lifting and training. And then the other gym I trained at was Sensi 360 Fitness. And it was a little bit more of that like functional FMS, Paul Check stuff. So that was pretty cool just to educate myself a little bit in some of those things that I had absolutely no idea about. And then started to get more into the education side around 2016. Got into the Renaissance periodization stuff, where I was just using crazy amounts of volume. We can get into that when we get into the programming aspect. But then I think it was late 2018 2019, I started to get into the N1 principles. And that brings me to COVID. And once COVID happened, the world got super weird. And I decided, hey, I've always wanted to have a gym. There's no better time than now. So I actually started buying equipment on Facebook Marketplace, storing it in my apartment, actually, 3 stories up. So I found like 120-pound dumbbells to 100-pound dumbbells and had to carry them all up the stairs and had them just hanging out in the hallways and whatnot. But that pretty much just brings me to where I am here. So yeah.
Sweet. That's awesome, dude. I love that. I want to dig into a couple things real quick before we jump into updates, just because it's relevant to what you just talked about. But when you started training at 11 or 12, how many years was it from then until the point where you kind of hit puberty, so to speak?
I would say from 7th grade going into 8th grade, I think I gained around 35, 40 pounds in like 3 months. So yeah, I was probably like 14 years old. I started getting these like crazy stretch marks around my chest, on my quads and stuff. So yeah.
That's awesome. So I'm guessing the first like 2 years, you probably didn't notice much until your body hit that kind of like testosterone induced growth stage. And then everything just kind of blew up.
Yeah, pretty much. And doing that, like the UD pyramid I had talked about, doing like the 12, 10, 8, and so on. I was doing that for bench, squat, and deadlift, and hang clean like 3 times a week. I mean, it was just insane amounts of volume.
Yeah. Cool. That's awesome. Well, that story kind of... Oh, sorry. I got a delay.
No,
what was that trigger? Okay. I was going to say your story is maybe like 2 years ahead of mine, because I was a little later in puberty, but it was kind of the same idea. I started training around 14, didn't hit puberty until 2 years later, and then kind of things started to manifest. But I was just curious because those first 2 years pre-puberty, it felt like when I look back at pictures, like I thought things were happening, but really like nothing was happening. I was just kind of lifting weights. But I think either way, it kind of helps set you up and gives you a base going forward. So the other thing I wanted to address on that was the Body for Life, because that is hilarious. And I love that your dad was doing that, because I also did it. It was in the late 90s when it was big. And I was super inspired by like Bill Phillips. Also, Aaron, I was thinking that would be somebody that I'd love to get on the podcast, given that he had such an influence on me in the early days. And he lives in Golden, which is just up the road from me. But anyways, so anyway, the Body for Life stuff was awesome. And they also incorporated a lot of that kind of pyramid style training where it would be like 12, 10, 8, 6. And then usually a lot of the prescription would be like you'd go 12, 10, 8, 6 of a compound movement. And then you would superset the set of 6 with an isolation movement for the same muscle group. And so I used a lot of that, like, bench press 12, 10, 8, 6 into dumbbell flies for 10 to 12 or something like that. And that was actually how they would train a muscle group. So it would just be like 5 sets twice a week or something like that. So it was kind of evidence-based before evidence-based had its statement, Anyway, that was interesting to me. Cool that your dad was into it.
Yeah, so I think real quick we can jump into some updates. Adam, what's been going on with like the last week for you? Anything to share?
Not a whole lot. I just wrapped up a 7-week mini cut. So I went from like 182 to 177. So I really didn't lose a whole lot, but very much looking forward to getting back into a surplus, that's for sure. Other than that, not a whole lot. Did some woodworking over the weekend, did some wood splitting and selling some wood. So yeah, that's about it.
So manly.
Interesting. Using some of those, that functional muscle right there. Real quick question about the mini cut. What was the purpose behind it? Was it just, hey, I'm a little bit out of practice, just want to run this, or just take us through a little bit of the reasoning behind that?
A couple different reasons. One reason, just to clean up a little bit before I go into a little bit more of a gaining phase over these next couple of, might be more like a year. I might look to compete in 2023, but we'll see if I can actually add some mass to my legs or not. And then also just, it's probably been 2 years since I've done like a dedicated deficit. So just kind of being able to push myself a little bit.
Yeah, make sure that the old willpower and that the wheels actually hit the pavement that the brain thinks they are, sort of thing. I get that for sure. I find that much more so with me with like gaining as opposed to dieting. Like I find dieting like quite simple. I enjoy the foods, pretty much eat like that anyway. It's the gaining where I have to like kind of slightly stray away from like my principles around food just to get enough in, or I'm just like, fuck, I'm just not hungry and don't want to force it, sort of thing. So I get that. But it's like you said, when you're natural and you've been doing it for a while, like, and you want to put on, you know, especially like leg size or whatever, like you have to eat it. That's the cost of playing the game, sort of thing. So I get that.
Yeah,
sorry.
I definitely have to push my food really high. Last year I was around like 196 and my carbohydrates were around 700 grams. And that is just a full-time job in itself, getting that food down. So I kind of wanted to just reinstate some appetite as well.
I get that. Yeah. When you get up there, it's even with cereal and stuff like that, like it's still not easy or fun at all.
Yeah, Adam, did you say your body weight right now at the end of this mini cut?
Yeah, my average for last week was 177.
And what was your competition weight the last time you competed? And it was 2017, 16?
2014 was my first and only natural show, okay. And I competed at 157. 2019, I did get like stage lean and did not compete, but I was 165. So I did put on some muscle between there.
Very cool. Very cool. And do you think where you're at 177 now sets you up where you think you would need another 10 pounds to go, or where do you think you are in relation to that?
Yeah, I do think I would be in that 165 range for sure. But after seeing pictures of Alberto Nunez, I don't know, I might need to go into the 157s.
Yeah, I mean, when he looked contest lean 10 pounds ago. And then he was like, yep, 10 pounds to go. I'm like, man, you are fucking nuts. That is insane. But yeah, I guess at those levels of the pro status, you just have to get that peeled if you want to compete. All right, let me jump into updates real quick here. So last week when we spoke with Jeremiah on the reverse dieting roundtable, I mentioned that I had been sick. And later that day, I think it was, if I didn't mention it on the podcast, I discovered that my sickness was in fact something called hand, foot, and mouth disease, which is like semi-embarrassing just because it's like such a children disease, child disease. And then the internet, of course, says many adults that get this show no symptoms. So I was like, great, I'm one of the adults that got it and shows symptoms. But I guess I was lucky in the sense that it's hand, foot, and mouth disease, and I got nothing on my hands or my feet, which apparently is some of the worst stuff that people experience. They get like these blisters that they can't like pick stuff up or walk or anything like that. So I got none of that. I just got all the mouth stuff, which was also pretty miserable. So I'm really glad that is over, and my body fought its way through. On top of that, I am just as of yesterday finished my mesocycle in my programming. So I do 9 to 10 day microcycles, and I did 6 microcycles, meaning I was training for somewhere between 54 and 60 days, which if you were on a calendar week would be 7 or 8 weeks, but about 6 microcycles for me. And I am in the process of entering what I call my flow week, which is kind of just a week where it's like a deload, but I'm kind of instituting new movements, feeling the flow of what instituting these movements is going to have on my cycle in general. And this cycle, I actually have 6 new movements that I'm instituting. So I'm doing a sissy squat instead of a lengthened overload leg extension. I'm changing my iliac lower lat pull down to a bilateral. I'm just kind of at the point where the amount of time and mental energy that it takes to have to work hard on both arms. I just want to have more bilateral stuff in there so that it's just less time commitment and energy. Then I'm changing my cable chest press to a cable chest fly. And so my goal here is to be able to use less weight and kind of emulate the pec deck machine, the one where you grab the handles and kind of squeeze together, bringing the inner bicep across the chest. So I have that set up pretty similarly with my cables in my gym. I'm putting in a low incline dumbbell bench press instead of the press around. So because I'm changing the cable press to a fly, I'm changing the press around to a dumbbell press. So we're kind of making some even swaps there. Doing a B stance RDL. I took RDLs out completely in my last meso, so I had no hip hinges except for the hip extension machine. That was the first time I've done that in many years. Just wanted to see how things went without an RDL variation in there. And I liked it, honestly. I feel like sometimes I let my ego get a hold of me with RDLs. And so as I introduce RDLs back in, I have this B stance RDL where I have no idea what weight I'm supposed to be using or any comparison metrics. So I think I can keep ego out of that a little. And then the last movement that I have not fully decided I want to swap in or not is something that maybe you guys have experience with. So I wanted to ask you about it, but it's kind of like, so I know the rear delt doesn't use the rib cage the same way that the lats do. So you wouldn't want to necessarily like reach across the rib cage to lengthen the rear delt. But I have seen a lot of people using, like, I guess you would call it like a rear delt pull around, where it's coming from like a higher angle, almost like a wide grip lat pull down, but it's kind of like cross body. And then you almost do like a bow and arrow thing as you're coming down. Do you guys have any experience with that movement?
I do not. I've done something similar, but I have not like pulled the arm closer to myself. I've kind of done it where it's like reaching around a little bit and then just keeping it in like that fly pattern. But I have not messed around with that.
Okay. Aaron?
I have seen it, and I remember when I saw it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to try that, and then I never did.
Okay.
So I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah. So I think I would like to try to institute it instead of that movement that you and I have discussed on prior podcasts, where I do like that kind of wide cable row where the elbows stay high, And you mentioned how you don't really like that feeling of having the elbows up. You much more prefer to kind of have the elbow tucked down a little bit. What do you think about that, Adam? Do you do any of that, like, kind of, I wouldn't call it 90-degree position of the humerus, but maybe it's more like 70 or 60 as opposed to that like 30 to 45 rear delt position?
Yeah, I feel like I get way better rear delt contractions when I have my elbows a little lower.
So what about for upper back, though? Like, if the goal is upper back, do you feel like there's utility in having the elbows out wider, or that doesn't seem to make much of a difference either?
For myself, I've messed around with like upper back pull downs, upper back rows, and doing like a slightly wider grip tends to get me just more upper back in general. But yeah.
Without having to manipulate that elbow position too much higher. Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to get some neck issues. So I just like try to find like the ways that I can do movements without getting that to aggravate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to the reason I'm asking these questions is because Aaron and I had this discussion where he really talked about how he doesn't like having the elbows up. He doesn't feel like it like feels crunchy on his shoulders or something along those lines. So I talked about how, limiting range of motion is an effective way where you don't try to get as much retraction when your elbows are that high. So that's been working well for me, Straker. But yeah, I'm just kind of ready, I think, to swap that one out and try this other thing. So I think I want to try it bilateral first. So I don't know if it's going to work with my rotate handles, but I want to try to set them up cross pulley and then do this kind of lengthened cross body pull thing. But if the bilateral version doesn't work, then I'll swap to that single arm version that I kind of referenced in the beginning. So anyway, that's one that I'm going to play around with, but always exciting to have new movement swaps coming in. Even a little bit of variation can make a big difference psychologically. So that is where I'm at with things. And yeah, let's pop it over to you, Straker. What's up with your updates?
Before I give my short update, I really wanted to just briefly mention that how prepared are you for the incoming DOMs of the B stance RDL? I feel like that is a movement that it just obliterates people. And it's like, it's very unassuming. And then like a day later, you're like, what the fuck happened?
Yeah. So I have tried it now the last 2 weeks, different variations, because I'm trying to decide what variation I want to use in my program. So the first week I tried it with cables, literally holding like a D handle in each hand and doing it that way. And it was fine. The problem I have with cables is unless you have one of those, unless you have the ability to set yourself up directly above the cable, it's always kind of pulling you forward. And so you're always kind of pulling backwards, which I feel like decreases stability. Like it does give you that sense of having like a really good stretch in your hamstring, and it facilitates horizontal movement of the hips, which I both like. But force output just seems lower that way. So I didn't end up enjoying the cable variation as much. And then I tried trap bar, which I do like, but I haven't quite figured out exactly where to put my foot, because the back of the trap bar kind of runs along the back of my foot as it goes up and down. And then I did dumbbells yesterday. Each of these I just did one set, and each time I got sore from doing just one set. But the dumbbells I think were my favorite. The problem is my dumbbells only go up to 100, and I was hitting like a set of 10 with multiple RIR. And one thing I don't do is do hip hinges over 10 reps. So I'm going to have to probably use the trap bar and just make the best of it. But regarding your question about soreness, yeah, I'm going to 100% start with one set. And until the soreness is like, a 6 or a 7 or less the next day or two, probably not add a second set to that one.
Yeah. All right. So for me, not too much. I guess this is a lot. I am testing a new diet for the next 2 weeks. It's specifically like anti-inflammatory, very, very like low safe, or like low sensitivity, really, really safe diet for when I have clients who come in with just have like a lot of issues, and we need to like really pull things back just to get some relief, drop inflammation and stuff. So putting this together and running it myself for 2 weeks, and it's throwing a wrench in things. Obviously, yesterday was my first day on it and first day training, and I had to like pull back my RIRs, which is admittedly very, very difficult for me. I can say that like, okay, Aaron, like we're doing this, like food has dropped from like 3,500 calories down to like 26 I ended up on yesterday. We need to stop things at like 2 RIR, you know what I mean? Because I'm going to fall apart. And like, I'm in the set on the leg press. And like the next thing I know, I'm like, I think I can beat last week's reps. And I just like can't keep myself to the 2 RIR. And I'm like, if I'm close to a PR, I'm just going to fucking take it. And I get like kind of frustrated, but I just can't stick to it in the heat of the game. But the diet stuff is going okay. We'll see how I feel next week when we talk about it. But I like one of the biggest things for me is like I like to coach from experience, and I'm not gonna put a client into something that I haven't personally done myself. So this is me gaining that experience.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that's about it, I think.
So we had a cool question come in I saw on our discussion for next week about how you and I eat differently too. So this could be something fun to delve into next week.
Yeah, that one will be good to talk about.
Yeah, cool. Well, you ready to jump into some Adam Neth discussion here?
Well, yeah, let's do it.
So where do you want to take this, Aaron? What direction?
So I think, Adam, you did a great job of like getting us to pretty much like here. But one thing I think you kind of like glossed over a little bit that I think we can dig into more is opening the lift lab. So I think like it, obviously I like I said to the listeners, I had the opportunity to go lift there with you a couple weeks ago, and it's just awesome. It's like super, super well thought out. It is like a like a 10 out of 10 garage gym setup. So I just take us through the process of like opening it, how you source things a little bit, what your thought process was, especially at a time when you opened it, if I'm correct, was like kind of in the middle of the pandemic or around that time, and just uncertainty, and just take us through that.
Yeah, so I had mentioned I trained at two different gyms in Cincinnati, and the main gym I trained at really only had like dumbbells to 100, a barbell, a pulley system, and a leg press. So I had always been trying to get my boss to buy more equipment, especially as I got into the N1 stuff and I started to understand the utility of all of these different pieces of equipment. So once COVID hit, they shut down the gyms for 10 weeks. And luckily, I was able to go to that gym and still train. But I had a lot of time to think about things and the trajectory of my career. And then I decided, we lived in an apartment at the time, and my wife and we essentially drove up into like the Dayton area, even 2 hours away, looking for different houses and whatnot. Long story short, we randomly drove through this town, Tip City, which is where the Lift Lab is. And my wife had a couple days later found the house online, and she went up and viewed it. And she's like, yeah, this is the house we have to buy. So we put an offer in. I hadn't actually even seen the house before, just went with it. And that's when I started to source some of the equipment through Facebook Marketplace. And that's where I found just a plethora of deals. I mean, especially around the time that COVID happened, I hopped on it early enough that I found, for example, 1,100 pounds of dumbbells for $500. So that's less than 50 cents a pound. So I got pretty fortunate in finding some of that stuff. And then when we ended up moving up to the house, I had all the measurements and whatnot. So I found some app on my phone and made sure that I had the measurements and put in every piece of equipment that I wanted to buy and make sure it all fit in there. And then, of course, just making sure that I found solutions to saving space, like the Prime Prodigy rack was a no-brainer. Being able to do squats and have a cable system, lat pull down, dip bar, having dual pieces like the leg extension, hamstring curl. But yeah, I really wanted just to create I still wanted to work with people in person, but I didn't want to do the whole split shift thing where you're working, 5 hours in the morning, 5 hours in the evening. It just lends itself to being burnt out pretty quickly. And I had been struggling the last 3 years of training with that schedule. So I really wanted to just have some sort of hybrid approach where I could take online clients and then still work with people in person too.
With that you just brought up, because I know, like, I'll get questions on Instagram and stuff, and it'll be coming from like PTs who are like, Aaron, I want to transition into the online space. Like, how do how can I do it? And something that to be completely honest, like I've never been an in-person PT. I started online, and I don't know if I talked about this on the podcast before, but like the real reason I did that is I just used to have like horrible social anxiety. And only through Straker Nutrition Co. and the podcast really has really helped me kind of be able to break out of it. Often it's still there, but so like I don't have an answer for you. Like I've never transitioned. I just started online. So for someone like yourself who's still doing both, like how do you manage your schedule and stuff? Like if you would share that like with people that do you have I guess hybrid clients who are online and in person, or just take us through how that business model is set up a little bit?
Yeah, I do have a few hybrid clients. They came from actually like the Cincinnati area. So they'll drive up and do like a session with me once a month. Then I might have a new program for them, talk through some issues they might be dealing with. But as far as the hybrid approach, I will say like the in-person stuff, the scheduling, it becomes just such a nuisance. When you wake up at 5 a.m., you got a 6 a.m. client, and your 6 a.m. client cancels and then tries to get in later in the week. It can be a whole lot. So I am going to try to actually transition this next year more into online and just have in person just in the morning, because I'm still doing morning and evening about 4 days a week. And like I said, it's a lot to manage when your schedule is kind of at the mercy of other people's schedules.
Yeah. Yeah. Understood. Thanks for sharing that. The one thing that, and I guess we'll ask you this and then we'll kind of continue on. How do you find that you schedule your like online clients? Are you someone who has like you can check in like Monday through Friday, Monday through Saturday, or is it like, hey, you check in Monday, Tuesday? How do you set that up yourself?
So I have all my clients contact me through WhatsApp, but then I like to do just like really formal check-ins. So I'll have like, hey, your check-in's on Sunday. I need this by 9 a.m. And then I just take that day to get back to them. Of course, I know shit comes up, shit happens. So I try to be as flexible as possible with people, but it's very hard, especially with the in-person clients, because it doesn't allow my schedule to, I have to almost just have set timeframes for people to check in.
Yeah, that's what I do. And that's what I would recommend for anyone listening. Do not run a very loose ship. Submit a check-in whenever. You want to be able to plan your hours and stuff to get them adequate responses. You want to know when they're coming in for sure. Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add on that, Brian? Or any questions, follow-ups?
No, it was interesting. Yeah, I think that's awesome. Yeah, the Lift Lab is dope. I hope one day that I get the opportunity to train there. And it would almost be a shame if you just went online and you didn't have that place as a place to train people. I mean, it would be like a super dope, just like home gym for yourself. But it would be a shame if other people don't get the opportunity to use that as well.
Yeah, if you guys are ever in the area, you got a place to train. But my wife actually, she trains in there as well. So.
You're good? We were kind of like breaking up there a little bit. I couldn't tell. Okay. Moving on. So let's transition the conversation a little bit, Adam, to like your approaches to programming, right? So I know, you briefly mentioned coming up, finding things like Lane Norton, and then like Matt Ogus and 3DMJ, and then RP and N1, which is a really, as you were talking that, I was like, oh wow, he got like really lucky with like really quality influences. But I also think that is also probably a bit of a testament to like your, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like ability to like sift through information. Cause it's not like you probably just saw one, you probably like saw like two or three and you're like, this one seems like the best to me. And then through that, like, let's just talk about, because you are still, of course, Brian and I are going to consider you pretty, young, especially to come through like those ranks or transitions of these different kind of, not necessarily like modalities, but different factions of information. And then like just how you kind of settled on your own philosophy towards training through all of these.
Yeah. So I would say I built the majority of my base through doing like the power hypertrophy adaptive training, the push-pull legs training. And I did that pretty much for, I would say like 6+ years straight. Never changed a program, never messed around with different exercises. I mean, it was literally just the same thing. I kind of had that mentality of just like work hard, train to failure, just the toxic male trait thing. If your joints ache, keep training hard. Who cares? Nobody cares. Work harder type of thing. So then when I got into the Renaissance periodization stuff, that was in like 2016. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think that's when N1 had started, like 2016, 2017. Do you guys remember?
I think so. Brian actually introduced me to N1 in late 2020. And yeah, I remember from things that I went back seeing, that's when they kind of like Cassim branched off from, or when the whole MI40 thing fell apart or whatever happened there. And then he, I don't want to say like rebranded, but started his own thing in N1, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause I had seen Austin Current, Alex Bush, the physique development guys doing stuff with Coach Cassim. And initially I kind of just wrote it off. Just because I felt like, my ego was in the way. I felt like I knew I had the formula already, and then once I got into the Renaissance periodization stuff, I used crazy amounts of volume. I don't know how I made it through any of those programs. I look back and I had 8 sets of deadlifts in just one day. And then later in the week, I'd have 5 to 8 sets of barbell squats. I will say I had great results utilizing that. And that was when I started to ramp my sets up across the mesocycle, which I had never done that before. So I think I ran the RP stuff for 12 to 18 months, and I responded fairly well to it. But I do just feel like it beat me up, especially because around that time frame, it was very volume oriented. Did you guys ever do any of the Renaissance periodization style programming?
Not really. So, through through 26, from 2012 pretty much to 2016, Brian basically did all of my programming. Because I was a member at his gym, and talk about, getting lucky with where your kind of sources come from. So I basically just followed whatever Brian had us doing. And then after that, I kind of transitioned into I just got burnt out on CrossFit and was injured. And, then I went into Olympic weightlifting for a little bit and injured myself and had a knee surgery that I couldn't come back to Olympic weightlifting from. So I was like, I'll get into powerlifting, right? I can't do the dynamic movement yet. I just need to do stuff slow. So I started following more the hybrid powerlifting stuff. And then by the time I kind of had burnout on that, it never really appealed to me, sort of thing. I kind of knew my body just couldn't handle that much anymore. And at the time I was just like, dude, I've been so hurt for the last 4 years. I just want to be able to go to the gym again. So I kind of was fortunate that I didn't get caught by that. Because I do not think I would have been able to handle it, to be completely honest.
Yeah, and that's what led me to N1 was all of the injuries that I have accrued over the last 12 plus years of training. So go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure. I had been having internet issues, so I wasn't sure if you guys could hear or see me. So I did come into the RP way of training right out of CrossFit. That was kind of my introduction to evidence-based training at that point, was through Revive and RP. And the interesting thing about that is I never went too crazy with the volume ramping. I think I always, the most I would do would be move from 2 to 5 sets, or maybe 3 to 6 or something like that across a mesocycle, never up to 8. But the interesting thing about that is that coming from the robust volume of CrossFit, that style of training from RP was actually less volume than what I was doing prior. So for me, I was looking at that and I was like, wow, this is really facilitating recovery really well for me. And so I responded really well to that. I remember the first, Dr. Mike used to always talk about how the deload can flush fatigue and help you realize the gains that you've made. And I'd never fully bought into that until I went through 1 or 2 mesocycles of volume ramping. And I remember one day I was doing dumbbell floor press and I hit the hundreds for 6 and it was 0 RIR or 7, something like that. And then I did my deload week and I came back and you're starting the new mesocycle at 3 or 4 RIR or whatever it is. And so I did the hundreds and I hit 6 reps and I was like, that was definitely a 4 RIR. Like a week ago, that was a 0 RIR. And now this is a 4 RIR. So that was like the first moment where I was like, wow, this whole like managing fatigue thing is really, really important. And, so yeah, that was my first experience with it. But one thing like currently that Aaron and I always talk about in relation to the RP is how crazy it is that you can take these really debilitating lengthened overload compound movements and not only increase the amount of sets you're doing each week, but then also work closer to failure on said movement. Like it's not hard enough just to do 2 sets of hack squat to 2 RIR, but now we're going to be doing 5 sets of hack squat to 0 RIR or something along those lines. And like once you reach a point of experience in your training, you just you just can't do that. Like I don't know if maybe this program is meant to target like your intermediate trainee that just can't go there, but anybody that I know that has gone there and taken a set of hack squat to 0 RIR, like you're not doing 4 more sets of that. That's just it. You're good, you know?
So Brian, I don't know how much Adam got of that, but I got very, very little, Adam. So I think you're just having some connectivity issues over there, Brian. We would get like 3-second snippets and then it would be quiet for like 10 seconds and then another like 2-second snippet and then it would be quiet for like 10 seconds. So we'll obviously leave it in because we have the audio recorded separately, but Adam and I don't have a clue what you just said.
Yeah, I think you might have talked a little bit about how like you're starting at like a 3 RIR, a 4 RIR, and then ramping your sets up across the mesocycle, and then you're training closer in proximity to failure. So you're already increasing your volume, and then on top of that, you're adding sets. So you get to the end of the program, and it's like a truck ran over you, and then you actually do need to take a deload and maybe even extend that deload because it's so systemically fatiguing. And I would tend to always get sick during my deloads, which could have been from too much volume.
Yeah. Do you think, and would you say irrespective of the time of the year, you would get sick, like even summertime, spring, et cetera, et cetera? And are you someone who, would you say like experiences like seasonal allergies or anything like that?
Yeah, I think I'm also one of those like higher stress individuals, which is why I have transitioned more of my training into like lower volumes. I just can't recover anymore from higher volumes, especially, being fairly, I'm not strong, but fairly strong for my body weight.
I would consider you strong. You're not like powerlifter strong, but you don't train powerlifters, specificity. I would say you're significantly stronger than the average individual who's in the gym. Let's put it that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things that I thought you brought up was really, and the reason I wanted to get into it was like, are you someone who's like frequently kind of experiencing getting, allergies, different things like that? Because this is something that like so many people don't really pay enough attention to touch on. Like, hey, I'm always getting sick, like right when I deload or different things like that. And it's probably the accumulating fatigue and stress and load that you're putting on your body, and just paying attention to these things a little bit more. And one of the things that's quite interesting is you're still, you said you're 29, still kind of like quite young. These things become more important as we really, as the replication of our cells slow down and we just can't recover from things as fast as we used to. So I think one thing that you just brought up that would be great to kind of transition the conversation into now a little bit is like, as you've come through these different pieces and like you kind of found, discovered N1 through just being really beat up and realizing that this wasn't sustainable for you, shifting the conversation into like discussion of like lower volumes, would you say you are now following or maybe prescribe for your clientele like lower volumes in general than maybe previously in the past? Or let's just open up the conversation there a little bit.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends upon the individuals. If I have somebody who's been training for like a year, I'm probably not going to be putting them on a lower volume program like myself, just because they can't contract as efficiently. They're not as strong, and they just don't have as many miles on their joints as well. They can't be quite as accurate with their execution as well. So what I can get out of one set of RDLs, somebody who is, fairly new might need 2, maybe even 3, 4 sets of RDLs, based on their strength level. And then also, if they are fairly new, having some of those complex movements, having them train with lower intensity. And then they also have more time and more repetitions to become more efficient at that movement. So they're like ingraining that movement pattern more.
Yeah.
So I would say like my lower volume programs tend to be more for my advanced individuals.
Yeah, I agree everything you said there. And I think that's something that as you become like more advanced, or, someone like, in your 40s or whatever, like where being an intermediate or beginner was so far ago that like we can sometimes like lose relativity to or forget about, right? Like when I remember for me, like learning how to hip hinge properly took me like years and years. And now like I've got to a point where like I'm pretty fucking good at hip hinging. I can't really do like more than 2 sets of like a hard hip hinging movement or I'll be destroyed. But Aaron at like 24 could probably do like 6 sets. And of those 6 sets, I would say maybe 30% were like really quality performed reps where like my specificity and execution was really, really on point. And in the beginning and when you're, younger, or I guess just like you said, less miles, you potentially, unless you have like a really, really good teacher or something like that, you need a lot of those reps just to get enough of the movement execution down. It's just more opportunity to learn the movement well. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, like something that a lot of people kind of forget about. And then another thing that you touched on that I want to kind of dig into a little bit more is like being able to contract the muscle like really, really well and having like a good like mind muscle connection to like, hey, I'm actually contracting where I want instead of just like the example that comes to my mind is like the unilateral supported pull down sort of thing. If you gave me that like 10 years ago, I would be like, okay, whatever. I'm just like, yanking this thing down and I could probably do like 6 sets. But now like I'm like after 2 really good sets of it, like I'm smoked and I'm like, I don't think I can put together another productive kind of set. But I think that comes with the years and the miles of just learning your body. And it's something I just don't know if you can do that in 6 months into training or something like that. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I would say that I can attribute N1 to opening my eyes around that. When I would do a pull down, I would just yank on it. If I was doing a split squat, I'm just going up and down. I'm not thinking about the intent of pulling with my lat or the intent of pushing with my quad. So I think the whole biomechanics and anatomy thing, the first course I took through N1 was just an absolute game changer for me. Just understanding like what tissue I'm trying to target and then how to set myself up for that tissue that I'm trying to target. So was very valuable for me.
Yeah, that one was really, really an eye opener for me. And then Brian, do you have anything to add on to that?
I'm not sure what I missed, but yeah, I would say that accuracy would be like the main word I would use to kind of describe what happens as you become a bit more advanced, is that you can send the stimulus exactly where you want it to be. And the interesting thing about that is like, you would think that just yanking on something and using more of your full body would be more fatiguing. So these statements of like, back in the day I could do 6 sets of RDLs or whatever. It's like, man, that's crazy because you're probably using your low back and your glutes and, your quads and like you're creating more systemic fatigue doing it. Whereas now it's like you do 2 sets and your hamstrings or your glutes, whichever one you're really trying to target, are like the region that receives your stimulus, which is awesome. But it's crazy that we were doing 6 sets where it was less effective, but systemically it was more daunting. Does that make sense? It's just kind of this weird dichotomy.
Yeah, I can actually attribute a lot of my so when I was doing when I was doing the Renaissance periodization stuff, I told you guys I was doing like 8 sets of deadlifts, and I wasn't getting quite as sore as I am now, even just doing 1 or 2 sets. And then on top of that, with the systemic fatigue, so my skin would actually break out really bad for a couple of years, and I could not figure out what it was until I got into the N1 stuff and started dialing my volumes back. And then my skin miraculously cleared up. So that was just a symptom of just creating too much systemic fatigue, I think.
That's very interesting. Yeah. I feel it, like for sure. I would say 6 years ago, I wasn't even like aware of systemic fatigue, like especially coming at the end of the CrossFit days. Like it was just like, oh, it's another day. I just got to like get up for it. I didn't really actually think about this idea of you should probably be motivated and like excited about your sessions. I was just stuck in this recurring pattern of like, fuck, I'm so beat up, but another day, gotta train, which is really interesting. So one question I have that I'm always curious about with people that kind of have an influence of N1 is the use of the way, or I guess the way in which you prepare for your top set, so to speak. Because I think there's kind of 2 similar but different ways that you can do this. Like my preferred way usually is to create as little fatigue as possible in getting up to the working weight, meaning that like if I'm working up to say a set of 6 to 8, it might go like 10 or 12 reps with super lightweight, 6 reps with moderate weight, 3 reps with heavier weight, and then maybe a double at like a weight that's just below my working weight. So none of those sets are actually hard. And then I'm going to go to like a 6 to 8 reps working set, right? Then the way that I think N1 usually incorporates this is to do something like an ascending RPE, where it might go like 6, 7, 8, 9, where each set is getting like a little bit more difficult. But what's essentially happening there is you're getting some effective volume, but you're also creating a little bit of fatigue that would inevitably have repercussions on your performance on the top set. And whether that matters, I don't know, because hypertrophy is forgiving and you just got to like train the tissue and all these things. Like, I don't know that it matters necessarily whether your top set is the heaviest top set you could do, or if it's just hard and you're still at an RPE 9, but it's less load than it would have been if you would have taken a different approach in getting there. Does that make sense? And how do you tend to implement your ramp up sets to your working weight?
Yeah, I'm kind of like Aaron, where I have a hard time nowadays sticking to like a 3 RIR, a 2 RIR. So I generally do not ramp up the N1 style. I typically do what you do. So like if I'm doing a pendulum squat, I might put a plate on, do it for 10, put 2 plates on, do it for 5, 3 plates on, do it for 2, 3.5 for 1, and then work up to my top set. That's generally how I like to do it.
Cool. Yeah, that's how I prefer as well. And I think that it gives you a cleaner, more ability to be diagnostic in your assessment of your performance too. Because on the other way, like the N1 way, if you say end up increasing your load and or your reps in those earlier build-up sets, then maybe you match performance on your top set, and in your mind you're like, okay, that's improvement because I improved these other sets, but like, is it really? I don't know. Like, I kind of like that cleaner diagnostic of like, hey, this is my set, this is the one where I'm either improving or I'm not improving, and I don't want any variables confusing that.
Yeah, and then also being able to kind of feel it out during those warm-up sets, where it's like, I know I'm not going to top what I did last week. I am just going to try to match it. Or even if I drop a rep or 2 off, I'd rather do that and still train really close in proximity to failure, and then like not get injured, right? Because that's something that's very important to me, given my history of so many injuries. But if I'm warming up and I'm like, yeah, this is the day, I'm going to take it. And I can kind of feel that during the warm up sets. And then know that, okay, once I get up here, I can decide if I'm going to add a little bit of load or if I'm going to be adding a repetition or two.
Mm-hmm. Do you usually take that, like once you do that build up to your top set of pendulum, is that usually just one top set, or do you then have like a back off, or like how much volume are you putting into these like fatiguing compound movements?
Right now I'm only doing 2 sets, and it's generally like a 6, the first top set's like a 6 to 10, and then the back off's like a 10 to 15.
Yeah, I love that. That's kind of my preferred approach as well. Do you take a different approach to that on like short overload isolation movements? So when we're talking about like, different row variations, like that's not even an isolation movement, but a short overload, like less fatiguing movement, like a row or a pull down, things like a lateral raise, a bicep curl, stuff like that. Like, are you doing more sets of those? Are you taking them closer to failure? What's kind of the way that you think about the difference between these two types of movements?
Yeah, right now in the compound movements, I'm leaving about 1 RIR. If I feel really good and confident with it, I'll take it all the way to 0. But then on my isolated movements, I'm definitely going to 0 RIR and usually using somewhere between 3 and 4 sets on those, based on how the structure of the rest of that day is. But usually 3 sets for the isolated movements.
Yeah, I'm similar as well. And how much general ballpark volume are you doing per muscle group? Do you have certain muscle groups that need a lot more and certain that need a lot less, or are they all kind of in a ballpark?
It's in a ballpark. I would say generally it's between like 6 and 10 sets per muscle group. Like my back day is essentially 4 back exercises and only 2 direct lat movements, 2 direct lat sets. So I'm doing the kneeling hammer strength row, and just looking at the pictures I've taken in this mini cut, I feel like my lats have actually come up. I haven't had that movement in my program in a while, and the lengthened overload and just being very accurate with it, I feel like 2 sets is like all I need.
Yep. Co-sign all that. Straker, any thoughts?
I mean, I agree with all of it. I'm like, I don't remember if we talked about this in person or not, Adam, but I'm like a recovering high volume person. Even like when we were starting the podcast and stuff, when Brian and I would talk and Brian would talk about his volumes, I'm like, I don't fucking get it. That's not enough work for me. And like, I was straight up just wrong. And now I just really kind of start to question, like, I'll go back and like look at some old programs I wrote and stuff as I'm like, looking for motivation for writing new ones. And I'm just like, I remember these training sessions, but I don't remember how I was doing like 4 sets on each exercise, or like why. I think a good part of it does come down to like exercise selection too. That's one of the things that I would say N1 has helped me the most with, is just exercise selection. And with that, I feel like you're like the term that Brian brought up, accuracy, right? When you are more accurate, like you don't need as many shots when your accuracy goes up, I think that's been a very, very big one for me there.
Yeah, definitely. Especially understanding like what full knee flexion is, how can you achieve that full knee flexion, how can you complement it so you're not doing redundant exercises. That was huge for me. I had absolutely no idea about any of that stuff. And then as far as the resistance profile stuff, that was very eye-opening to me too, and something that helps me be more accurate with my training, because I know now, like on the kneeling hammer strength row, for example, like I know, okay, this is lengthened overload, so I have to be extra careful, have extra attention when I'm in that fully stretched position, because that's the range of motion that counts the most for this exercise.
Yeah. I don't get to do that exercise. I don't have access to a hammer one, but so when you're standing next to it, but you're stepped back, that's more of like a line for the lumbar, right? And then when you're kneeling, that's more of a line for the iliac.
Yeah, I think for myself, it's kind of like iliac lumbar when I'm kneeling. It's kind of in between. It's not quite as iliac as I could get it with a cable. But, N1 will do the one where it's like standing stepped back. But I just had a hard time in terms of stabilizing that. So I just transitioned with the Angles 90 grip kneeling, and it's far more stable for me.
Interesting. Cool. I have a client that's I'm trying to debate between which version of that I want to throw in there. Do you feel like with the kneeling one, I'm sure it does, but the tension drops off a little more at the short position when you're lower down, right? When you're kneeling?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a pretty big drop off. I think I have 5 plates on there. So it's kind of a pain in the ass to load it up. But well worth it. Well worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's super cool. I feel like I had something else to say on this topic and I kind of lost my train of thought. If you have anything to add, Straker, I'm sure it'll come back to me.
The one thing that I thought would be cool to touch on before we wrap up is like, how would you say that what your knowledge is like in the last like year or so, how is that translated into like your clients and the quality of the programs for your clients?
Yeah, there's just so much nuance in this space right now. So I think with this whole like lengthened overload discussion, it's made me definitely choose better exercises for my clients. And then utilizing intensity techniques that kind of cross over into the principles, partials, 1 1/4 reps, stuff like that. But I feel like this past year, for my clients, I would say, again, it's just a conglomeration of many things that I've learned over the past decade plus. But for myself, I feel like I'm one of those people, especially when I got into the N1 stuff, I started to overanalyze, overthink, and the N1 programming courses, I don't know if you guys took those, but I spent like 2-3 years like running N1 programming on and off. And then had kind of found myself going back to higher volumes and then lower volumes. So for the past, and I'd say in this last year, I have really just decided like low volume is the way for me to go, and keeping things extremely basic so that like I do know what is eliciting change. I do know what might be causing pain. I honestly have kind of just stripped my programming back to basics, just doing them very, very well.
I think one of the best things that's come out of this prioritization of movements that train at long muscle lengths is that it's almost like reduction of volume has become a necessity, which makes training more time efficient. So like all of these kind of things, like, okay, we can choose movements that provide a higher stimulus. Yes, they might have a higher fatigue cost, but like I'd still rather do like 2 sets of this movement than 4 sets of this movement if we're thinking that they're going to be a similar stimulus to fatigue cost, right? And so we can just become a little more efficient with our training. And then that's obviously carried over into our clients as well, where like we probably don't need to have like Becky from down the street doing like tons of dumbbell spider curls when she could do just like 2 sets of face away curls, and like that's good for the biceps for the week, so that's kind of like the one way that I really think it's enhanced the training experience across the board. And then the other question that selfishly I had for you was that I know you have that awesome leg extension machine at your place, but do you do anything, or do you even care about lengthening the rec fem? Like, you do any sissy squats or bodyweight leg extensions, reverse Nordics, anything like that?
So I have not messed around with the sissy squat recently, just due to my right knee gives me some issues. So I would say like right now, my biggest focus is my hamstrings. Like my hamstrings are I've torn both of my hamstrings 3 or 4 times. I've had SI joint dysfunction. I actually tore both of the labrums in my hips. So I have to be very careful with my lower body, exercise selection. So I would say like right now, I don't know if you guys know who David Gray Rehab is. I think he's in like Ireland or something, but works alongside like athletes who have, SI joint dysfunction, who have hamstring issues. So a lot of and I know we talked about like how to warm up for top sets, but before I actually do my top sets, I do quite a bit of like breath work, trying to get my rib cage in the proper position, because I think like my rib cage, pelvis, something is off, and has led me down the road of getting so many injuries. So I tend to keep my exercises just very similar across all of my blocks, until something gives me an issue, and then I'll pull it out.
Yeah. So your leg days are really just like kind of pendulum, leg extension for quads, and then hip hinge and leg curl for hamstrings.
Yeah, and I actually had the hip hinge out for about 8 weeks. I went on vacation and drove up to Michigan for like 5.5 hours, and then had like an impromptu session, and my SI went out. So I had to pull the RDLs out and actually just put those back in yesterday, just one set. But yeah, the majority of my movements are leg extension, pendulum squat, hamstring curl, RDL now, and I have a split squat in there as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. You do not have I just thought of this, but you don't have a hip extension, a 45 degree or a horizontal or anything like that.
No, unfortunately not. But I'm blessed that I have a gym 7 minutes away, Hybrid Fitness, and they have just awesome equipment, great equipment. So I'll use the 45 degree hip extension, the adductor machine up there. So I just have 2 leg days. I have like a leg A and a leg B. I do one at the Lift Lab. I do the other one at Hybrid. So I can utilize those pieces of equipment that I definitely need.
Sweet. That's awesome. Yeah. I've found the 45 degree hip extension, especially if you have like a good one where you can hold weight with arms outstretched, just chef's kiss. So
what brand do you have for that?
I bought the man, I'm almost embarrassed to say this because I don't support the guy, but I bought the Brett Contreras one, the BC Lab or BC Strength.
Oh wow, okay.
But I really like it. So that one was $500, and it adjusts super high, and then I actually use the prime wedges underneath it too to make it even higher. But it's quite high. So when I was debating getting it or not, it was like, okay, the BC Strength one is $500, or the awesome Atlantis one that Cass has that adjusts both horizontally and vertically or whatever. You can adjust it both ways. That one was like $1,000 for the smaller version. And then it's like $2,800 for the big version that Cass has. But I don't know, man, like that extra $500, it was like definitely a debate in my mind because that one is so cool. But at the end of the day, I don't know if it's like doubly as cool.
Yeah. And plus I think I inquired with Atlantis about the smaller one, and they were like, yeah, for us to ship this, it's going to be more than the actual unit. Because they're Canadian based.
Yeah, that would be definitely a deterrent as well, because I feel like for the BC Strength one, I think shipping was included. Like I just paid the $500 and then it arrived like 4 days later. So I think it's a great one. Like it's super high, it's super comfortable, and I recommend it, even though I don't support Brett necessarily.
Yeah, I'll have to definitely check into that because I had a Cybex one, but it just had the bottom thing for your heels. Do not like that at all. I definitely like the ones that support your ankles more. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had the Titan one prior, which was the same idea where it just supported the heels. And I felt so unsecure in it when I would have heavy load pulling me forward that I ended up buying, they call it a hammy strap, which is basically like an airplane seatbelt. And so I would strap that around my legs as my heels are against the other thing. And the only problem with that is that I didn't even think about this till Cass pointed it out to me. But when you have something strapped around your legs like that, like a loop, you're actually fighting abduction the whole time, which is not what you want in a sagittal plane movement. So I hadn't really thought about it. Like in the end, I think it was fine. Like we're probably dealing with such small margins that it's not like that big of a deal. But in the pursuit of comfort and optimality, it just made sense for me to get the one with the really solid, secure calf pads on there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I know we want to be respectful of your time. Adam, Brian, is there anything you want to add on to the back end of this one?
No, I think we're good. I got to get kids to school. So, yeah, we've had a good conversation, though. I'm glad you made it on, Adam.
Yeah, Adam, before we take off, can you share with the listeners where they can find more about yourself, what you do, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, you guys can find me on Instagram. My handle is at Adam Neth, and that is Neth. And then I also have an Instagram for the Lift Lab, so that's LIFTE Lab.
Website, anything like that?
Website, just adamneth.com. And then I started a podcast a couple weeks ago, the Lift Lounge. So we'll be putting out some content in the next couple of weeks.
Fantastic.
Sick.
I will make sure we link all of that in the show notes.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had no idea you started a podcast, so that's super cool. Make sure you guys check that out and go to his Instagram and check out his home gym, the Lift Lab. It's super dope.
Super dope. As always, Adam, thank you. It was a great conversation. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Guys who are out there listening, Brian and I will talk to you next week. I think we are doing our monthly Instagram Q&A.